Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here. I'm just going to bring up my notes on my phone so I can have all things on every device. So as you've heard, my name is Kay. I'm Head of Arts Technologies, where I've been for the last 7 years at Serpentine. I should tell you, interestingly, that I come to this as someone who's done a number of things in the past. I was also an electronic musician. I was also a digital archivist for a number of years, where I used to work on the sort of archiving of photographic collections by a number of different photographers. And I should also say that I'm not really a traditional curator. I'm particularly interested in the role of production and producing. So I don't think I need to introduce the Serpentine, but if I do, it's a public art gallery based in Kensington Gardens and Hyde Park. It's been there since 1970. We are a charity and we don't have a collection. So the focus of the work that we do is really on these key areas of ecology, technology and community. We're perhaps most well known internationally as for our pavilion program, which is a building that is constructed by an architect who's never had a building built in the UK. That happens every summer and becomes the sort of basis for a number of events. We have a series of park nights, so it becomes like the center, like the central sort of social hub of the galleries over the summer. So I'm going to talk specifically about the Arts Technologies programme, which is, as this says, we propose, and I think you just said this, proposes critical and interdisciplinary perspectives on advanced technologies through artistic interventions. And what I want to talk about today is the fact, both the kind of what those artistic interventions are, but that the foundation of this programme is located in this evolving R&D platform, which is not a digital platform, it's not a gallery space, it is a networked space that supports the development of infrastructures for ongoing artistic exploration and interrogation of advanced and emerging technologies. So the way that we do that is we initiate and support artists in the development of ambitious projects, using advanced technologies as a medium tool or topic that often operates beyond gallery walls. And we also we were facilitating something called the National Creative R&D Working Group, which was a series of organisations from the National Gallery and so forth who were doing certain activities using in digital. I should say that this programme has been in existence for the last 10 years. It emerged out of not only sort of a creative need to support creative production, also as we were overhauling the organization's digital systems. So initially, my department was responsible for both. I'm pleased to say that we're not really responsible for both anymore because it was a total nightmare. But that is to say that I do think, and we do get involved in digital transformation in terms of internal systems, because it is really important. For example, at the moment, I have been sort of supporting, and you may have differing opinions on why we would do this, the opening of a crypto wallet for the gallery for a number of different reasons, which has been a real process. And I think it is important that the sort of back end and front end of things are working together for better or for worse. So this is the way that our department functions. We have these two main capabilities. On the one side, we have commissioning, and for that, I really am talking about the curatorial, but I'm talking about production. And so these take the forms of different kinds of commissions. I will talk a little bit about those. And on the other side, there is this R&D platform. This is our space for experimental artist-led work. It is about strategy developed by the art sector for the art sector. And it's also about sort of really focusing on particular areas. We should say that this kind of program developed out of the Arts Council approaching us as a convener of art and technology. And what that means is to bring together the art and the tech, and we also talk about science here as well, into different kinds of sort of partnerships But also the other important part of that is that we share all of this sort of work with the sector. In the eyes of Arts Council, that really only means other NPO organisations, national portfolio organisations, but we take that as meaning everyone. So I always like to just, this is what some of the work looks like. It doesn't all look like art, of course. And in particular, I like to show this image on the bottom right, because I think that when we talk about technology, we're not always just talking about screens or the online. This was the launch of a project called the Deep Listener that took place pre-pandemic in 2019. It was the most kind of beautiful launch of a project we've ever had. The project itself was an AR sort of audio and visual experience created by a Danish artist called Jakob Steensen. What he'd done was create a tour through an audio-visual tour through Serpentine, Hyde Park in Kensington Gardens. And on the opening, we took everyone who came out on a little walk through the park. We had people saying, oh, if you put speakers in the trees, none of that had happened. It was all sound coming from people's phones. And I think I always like to invoke Ursula Le Guin's sort of quote about that technology is the active human interface with the material world. And this is really how we approach technology at the department. So I'm aware that I tend to talk a little too much. So I'm going to try and talk through a series of projects quite quickly, and then I will talk about the R&D platform and some of those key projects, and then where we're sort of going now. This is our latest project. It opened 2 weeks ago. I've just spent 4 hours in the gallery this morning trying to fix the technology. Come and see it.
He was working on Sunday.
I was there. So good. So, I think half the time it's stuff that no one would notice, but we notice. So Third World, the Bottom Dimension is a project by a Brazilian artist called Gabriel Massan and their collaborators. So it is an experimental video game, or it's a video game, a major exhibition at Serpentine North on a Web3 project. It launched 2 weeks ago. It's been led by Gabriel with us, and it's about providing a platform for an emerging generation Afro-Brazilian queer artists. Really central to their practice is forms of world building and collaborative storytelling. I will skip over this. This is Gabrielle, a really very young artist who is much older than their years, I would say, who really is thinking about how to, I think this is a good phrase up here, alternately simulate and narrate situations of inequality within the Black, Indigenous, Latin American experience. And that is the reason for the title of Third World. It's really about addressing the way that perceptions of the way that they move through the world. So the game, it's a PC game that's been launched on Steam 2 weeks ago. So really it's about, the game itself is exploring Black Brazilian experience. Through the game, players are sort of brought on a journey of understanding. There's no map in the game. It's all about sort of, as games are, really sort of learning about who the sort of main characters and sort of really navigating your way through this world. What I haven't written here is that each level is conceptualized with a different artist. So we've been working with a psychologist and artist called Castiel Brasileiro, and on the second level, someone called Novissimo Edgar, who's a bit of a kind of poet, rapper, musician. And together with a team of Brazilian developers and a number of other contributors, the Third World, the Bottom Dimension was born. Just to give you a sense of what this is, that what has happened is Gabrielle has sort of built the sort of framework, the initial narrative in which other people contribute. They are also what they would call a digital sculptor by trade. So, you know, we're not using all the assets from the Unreal digital asset library that you can use for free that everyone uses. Every single asset within the game has been created by Gabrielle. We worked with a musician and experimental producer called Liza on the sound design. And what I think is quite important to say is that the whole project is, we commissioned it and we produced it. And I can't talk about this enough because I don't think it's really valued in the art world so much, which is the fact that that means that we produced it. You know, we run day-to-day production day in, day out, and we have made this happen. So I say that to sort of celebrate all of those people who've been involved within the team. It's not just curators, to make this happen. And it's all available for free. Here are some images from the game. These are from cutscenes. Sorry. And this is the credits list, of course, of all the people who've been involved in the creation of the project. So a few months ago, this also became an exhibition, which opened 2 weeks ago. And the idea being that we would be able to invite audiences to be immersed in some of the ideas. It was also about providing access to the game for those people who cannot download a PC game at home. Of course, that is only access for people in London or people who can travel to London, and to provide a different way of experiencing this project in sort of community with others is how we think of it. So you can come in, you can play the game in sort of these designed rooms, and you can also watch other people play. We have a broadcast room as well. And in addition, we wanted to address the fact that this was a group of Brazilian artists coming into the UK context. So we tried to address the sort of relationship between us as a kind of white cube art gallery in the park, and providing space for all the collaborators to show their own practice. I think what's also interesting here is that not all of the artists who've contributed to the video game would necessarily only make digital work. And I think that's all great. And so we have some of the sculptures and other pieces of work that have become part of this like bigger digital piece. This is some of the install shots. We have quite a lot of organic materials from offcuts from the park to create a kind of set design by someone called Ferman Ahmed. This is the broadcast room where you can sit and play. In the background, you see some of the sort of avatars by Novissimo Edgar. And this is Novissimo Edgar actually playing the game and showing some of the a visitor what to do in the game. And I think from previous experience of doing projects at Serpentine, it's always great to sort of provide a way in for the audience to have a discussion around how this project functions. You also see a lot of reflective material. Some of that is around like people seeing themselves in the world. I will skip over because this is many of the artists who've been involved. We will also have a series of events that sort of activate some of the thinking behind making the game. I'll just talk about a few other projects that we have. How badly am I running on time? Okay. Artist Worlds is a series of commissions, but also a Twitch program that explores sort of simulated worlds and storytelling. This was a project by Jakob Kutsteinsen. We sort of developed a what was a first-person VR work into a world, and we ran a live event during the pandemic where we had a number of people coming in. We did it all in VR, and we streamed it to Twitch, where the idea was that we went on a journey around this world that Jakob had created. And we had a series of readings and performances and conversations in different locations to sort of talk about what these locations were. And since the pandemic, that's sort of expanded into a way of us working with artists who are developing digital worlds or CGI projects or video games as a way it's not necessarily about showing a finished work. I think that's also important, but about doing playthroughs, bringing in other people to have conversations with them about how the project functions. And we most recently did a stream with KEY1, who are a collective who are working with video games. And the next one is, we haven't programmed another one. So yes, this is how this looked to people who are watching on Twitch in the depths of the pandemic. This is this was our first sort of major exhibition to take place in the gallery space. Ian Cheng is an artist who works with AI and simulations, or simulations is what we would sort of have always called video games before the pandemic, before video games were okay to talk about in the contemporary art world. And this was a two-part exhibition. Bob was the birth of an artificial life form in the gallery who evolved throughout the duration of the project. And what you can't see here is that this work has actually continued to evolve since then. What we had done was, you can tell this is also before the pandemic, we had a way that visitors, and we called it Skyped. You could Skype into the world. We probably would say you were zooming in now. Skype into the world, and you could sort of take over control of Bob. And what would happen is we were using essentially facial recognition to sort of map your facial expressions while you were doing it. And that was sort of mapped against like a model, sort of an AI model that was sort of from which Bob was learning. And what happened towards the end of the show is that Bob would just kick everyone out of the Skype because, and sometimes would just disappear off screen for days. But visitors were really cool about it because, you know, it was, you know, it gave us something to talk to people about. But I think the other thing was that we had to feed Bob twice a day, or he would die. And so all of these things are like, you know, this like active relationship with technology. It was a lot of fun. I became very attached to Bob. It's never happened before actually, where in the Serpentine, sort of old Serpentine gallery, there's a big sort of central space. The only time I've ever closed off that space, that became where all the computers were. And I would go in there and, you know, these works need maintenance, they need a bit of care. And I would go and sit there every day and I would look after Bob. Very attached. Need to get a life probably, but
this is a safe space.
So this was another pre-pandemic project. Ito Steil, a well-known theorist and artist based in Berlin. We worked with her on a sort of, it was an exhibition, a series of community-based events, and this AR application called Actual Reality OS. She was taking it as her starting point the fact that the borough in which Serpentine is located is the most unequal, I think, in the UK. Huge disparity between rich and poor in the area. So what we did is we started to work with a series of research partners. We worked with people from the Unite, the Union, Hotel Workers Branch. We worked with Architects for Social Housing and a few others. We also looked at data sets. And what we did was we created this kind of visualization, data visualization that sort of mapped on top of the Serpentine building. What you would do is you would walk outside the gallery, you would scan one of these sigils. These all have secret messages in them. I actually can't remember what any of them are anymore, but they weren't that nice. And then you could look at the sort of, you know, it's really about visually understanding the inequality through this visualization of data. We also had, we'd undertaken a number of interviews, and we'd sort of, we also had sort of statements from some of the research partners. And part of what we were doing was sort of giving money to some of these research partners to support their own data collection. I think another one of the partners, Disabled People Against Cuts, was kind of saying that there's no data collected about them anymore. So, and then we sort of did a number of other events with them. This was this show with another AR app inside, but I won't go into that. This is also a recent piece of work. I think we're also keen to support early stage R&D with an artist who's keen to do some kind of experimentation. Danielle is one of my favorites. She is an artist who uses video games to archive Black trans experience. So we supported her to do a bit of work with things like eye tracking, and that manifested itself into a live event, a live performance sort of play story that involved the whole gallery. She's really interested in different forms of controlling video games and controlling narratives within games. It's also about sort of acknowledging that you as a person have agency in how this world develops. We are developing a much larger project with her over the next couple of years, but I think this I also wanted to demonstrate that we do try and sort of do this kind of long-term development of projects, especially with technology. Things should probably fail sometimes, and you know, in the kind of cycle of hyper production and finishing projects, you don't often get a chance to do that. I'm going to skip this. This was a project called Catharsis, and these are some of the apps we did in 2019, and I think this shows how work has slightly changed since the pandemic. We were 10 minutes, okay. How work has changed. We were making a lot of mobile apps and pieces of software pre-pandemic. We haven't done that since. So this was, Sutella was a co-commission with Moderna Musate, looking at oracles, and we built an oracle that functions through a series of lava lamp heads, which have now joined the collection of Chiasma. Suzanne Triester, obviously wonderful. We worked with her on a book with an accompanying web AR app, looking at black holes, and that came out of some of her research that she was doing at CERN. Jakob Kudsteinsen, this was the first picture I showed you of the AR sort of trail through the park, and the Hito style. These are all available still. Hopefully they still work. This is also the thing about us not being a collection. You know, these are not works in our collection. We do, whenever we commission artists, we do have a kind of, it's usually about 6 months to 2 years, sort of aftercare. You know, we do updates, usually for a couple of operating system updates. But, you know, it's not something that we can manage in the long term. So this is a very different side of the work that we do, and this is something called Future Art Ecosystems. So this is an annual strategic briefing conceived with Rival Strategy, who work with organizations to do sort of organizational change. And we wanted to do that in relation to the art field, in particular in relation to art and advanced technologies. So with each briefing, we provide concept, references, language, and arguments towards the construction of 21st century cultural infrastructure. This is what we define as the systems that support the production, distribution, management, and financialization of art that engages with advanced technologies and is responsive to wider social issues that these technologies arise. And as I said, was born out of the need to inform organizational development in the arts. And I think, you know, this relates to the fact that we were doing all of this internal digital transformation work on systems and this kind of thing. And, you know, I think what we saw is that obviously for a very long time, there's a really rich dialogue around arts engagement with these technologies. We're not saying that we're ever going to say that we're the first or the best or any of those things. We are part of an ecosystem, but also addressing some of the mainstream narratives that these technologies are raising currently. I think AI is a very good example of that. So this was the first issue. This came out in 2020. We were due to launch on the day that the UK went into lockdown. So we pushed it back and so this was very much sort of an initial landscape mapping of art and advanced technologies as we saw it. You know, we were looking at the sort of infrastructures that have been built around artists working with advanced technologies. So we were looking at things like tech, the tech industry as art patron, obviously something that we're very aware of, and the relationship between the artists, organizations, and technological development. You know, Sometimes that is cheap R&D for tech companies. The art stack, which is our way of sort of talking about artists who have sort of built their own kinds of organizations around themselves. Team Lab is a very good example of that. And we did, this is was born out of our own experience of developing these projects, but also interviews. Of course, we're not just, we do undertake a huge number of interviews for these projects. This one less so, but this was early days. The second one that came out, and it is really a product of the pandemic, was Art and the Metaverse. And I should say that we called it this before Meta rebranded themselves. And of course, Metaverse has been back and forth, it's been around and about for decades. But it is a useful term when we're talking about some of this stuff. I mean, we do address the kind of, the issues with that term, but we have to call it something. Through this, we were really looking at sort of the shifts in digital infrastructure, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. And also really the issues that arts organizations faced in the wake of the pandemic, and the fact that digital strategy has never really been great. You may disagree with me of that, but I am a big believer that technology shouldn't be just something that happens to us, and that we should at least stick our oar in where we can. So we talked about something called the user experience of art, which is like really thinking about what our sort of bricks and mortar institutions are doing. We were looking at art adjacencies to see how other fields have been sort of allowing experimentation with certain kinds of CGI technologies over the last 10, 20 years. So we looked at the film industry, we looked at blockchain, we looked at the indie games industry, and we looked at architecture. And then we proposed a series of vectors that we see as areas to be explored. And these are greater interoperability between cultural institutions as well as art adjacent fields. And this is where really important around this is sharing capabilities. We do not think that every organization needs to do everything. Investment in advanced production capabilities, I personally think this is really key. Recognizing and supporting expanded economic and distribution rationales, and there's actually a couple more. Harnessing new proficiencies with regards to engagement with users as stakeholders, getting beyond this sort of idea of the general public and the general audience. And really, who is a stakeholder, who is important in the development of any institution. And devising new systems of measurement. I think we need to get beyond the number of people who walk through the door and the number of people that click on your website. That is a slightly more difficult one to address, but I think it's something that we should really have in mind. Some diagrams that I talk about. And then, get stuck. The last one was really looking at patterns emerging from decentralized technologies. That is not to say that we are, and that is whether you call that field Web3, crypto, DWeb, blockchain, whatever. Each of those come with different sort of ideological perspectives and positions. So we were interviewing a number of people across our Web3, crypto, innovation policy and civic spaces to really look at if there are any learnings to come from that field or fields. And I think that we're also sort of trying to sort of slightly shift the conversation around crypto away from financial speculation and around all the other things that it means. That isn't to say that we're ignoring the fact that financial speculation exists, but also that, also during the pandemic, there was this kind of, can't ignore that there was this huge NFT boom, and this is in part our way of addressing this. I will very quickly tell you, we also have 4 labs. We have a legal lab, which is really looking at about the role of the law in supporting art, tech and science collaborations. We are working on a series of licensing models. This sort of was born out of a series of projects that we developed where we really did not know how to position ourselves and And every session that we run with artists and organizations is always so brilliant. Every artist is requesting that we develop these tools, and at the moment what we're doing is trying to find the funding to be able to expand. Yes. We have creative AI lab that we've been running with King's for a number of years. Initially, the focus was on really surfacing the back end of AI systems and the sort of creative practice uses of those systems and the interfaces that artists are developing to do this work. We are expanding. The next future ecosystems may well be on public AI, which is a term that we're using and is a real response to what has been happening over the last year or so, 2 years around large language and image models. We have a synthetic ecologies lab, which is a focus on art and life sciences, really how, the role of art in sort of opening up some of these ideas. And then we have a blockchain lab that's been running for a very long time, since 2019, with someone called Ruth Catlow, who's the founder of Furtherfield, who's the best, and Penny Rafferty, who's an artist based in Berlin. Our focus is really on decentralized autonomous organizations and what the possibilities of those as ways of supporting, I would say, translocal art practice. So that's where we're going. What's next? Loads of stuff. As I've said about Faye, that will sort of start to move into public AI. As I also said, we're sort of working a number of licensing platforms and ways to sort of demystify some of the legal things surrounding art, how art and artists and arts organizations undertake collaborations. We're also doing some work which is about rethinking of ownership. We're experimenting with something called partial common ownership, which is kind of a stewardship model with the aim of sort of benefiting. A lot of these projects, of course, involve huge amounts of collaborators, and really how can we, or even sort of whole communities, and how can sort of different model of developing these projects, but how those projects exist in the long term benefit those communities and those contributors. Very much an experiment. And then we have a number of commissions. We will be doing one exhibition every 12 to 18 months going forward. So we are programmed for the next couple of years. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.